The room froze when she lifted her hands to speak, a humble waitress standing before a billionaire's mother, communicating not with words, but with light, the light of her hands moving with grace and sincerity. It was the kind of moment that breaks through walls, the kind that no amount of money can buy. No one in that grand dining hall had ever seen anything like it, and neither had he. Before we go deeper, subscribe if you believe that love still changes people. Elias Ward was the kind of man who didn't believe in kindness anymore. 36, sharp and composed, he lived inside glass towers and behind steel gates. His empire, hotels, yachts, private jets, was built on precision and control. But somewhere along the way, that control had cost him something irreplaceable, the ability to feel. He wore grief like a second skin, well-tailored and invisible to most. To the public, he was an icon of success, the embodiment of power and elegance. To those who worked for him, he was a storm contained in silence, and to himself he was just a man counting his losses. His father's betrayal years ago had hardened him. His mother's blindness, caused by an accident during those same years, had sealed his guilt forever. He provided for her lavishly, private nurses, imported food, live-in staff, but rarely presence. He loved her, but from afar. That was until one evening at the Aurelia, the luxury restaurant on the ground floor of his flagship hotel, a place where he rarely dined, but which bore his name like an ornament. That night, his mother, Margaret Ward, wanted something different. "I'm tired of being served by people who speak only for your approval," she told him in her calm, worn voice. "Let's eat somewhere ordinary tonight." He laughed softly. "Mother, I don't think you know what ordinary means anymore." "Then teach me," she replied. And so in a rare act of surrender, he escorted her downstairs to the restaurant that catered to his wealthiest guests, the same place where, at that moment, a young waitress was beginning the longest shift of her life. Her name was Ava Lane, 24, working 2 jobs, a quiet soul who never looked for attention, but somehow carried grace wherever she went. She had been at the Aurelia for 6 months, long enough to know how to move unnoticed between the powerful. Her co-workers often joked she was too gentle for this world, but what none of them knew was that her gentleness was armor forged from pain. Her younger brother, Daniel, had been born deaf, and caring for him had taught her a language most people never learn, the language of silence, patience, and empathy. When Elias and his mother arrived, the restaurant fell into hush. Heads turned. Conversations dropped to whispers. It wasn't every day that the owner himself came down to dine, especially not with his mother. Ava didn't know who they were at first. She saw only a tall man with eyes that looked like the storm before rain, and a woman beside him whose gaze didn't seem to focus anywhere. She approached their table softly, notebook in hand. "Good evening," she said with a warm smile. "Would you like to start with some wine?" Elias barely looked up. "We'll order later." But Margaret tilted her head, smiling faintly. "What's your name, dear?" "Ava, Mum." "Thank you, Ava. Could you read me the menu, please?" Ava hesitated for half a second, glancing at Elias, unsure if she should. His curt nod gave permission, though his eyes were already elsewhere, fixed on his phone. So she began to read, her voice gentle, her tone deliberate, painting flavors in words. Margaret listened closely, her smile deepening with each dish. When Ava reached the dessert section, the older woman laughed softly. "You make it sound like poetry." Ava blushed. "Food deserves to be introduced with love." Elias looked up for the first time, faintly amused, faintly intrigued. Few dared speak to his mother that way, few could. They ordered. Time passed. The conversation at the table was polite but strained, until Ava returned with their meals and noticed something small but crucial. The older woman was trying to find her fork by touch, her hand hesitating just inches away. Without thinking, Ava leaned down gently and whispered, "Would you like me to arrange your plate so it's easier to find everything?" Margaret smiled. "You can tell?" "My brother's blind in one eye," Ava said softly. "I've learned to see with more than sight." Elias's gaze shifted again, this time fully. The way she said it wasn't sentimental, it was matter of fact, real. Dinner went on quietly until dessert. Margaret asked, "Do you know any sign language, Ava?" The question startled her. "Yes, Mom. My brother's deaf." The older woman chuckled softly. "Then you can help me cheat a little. My son can't hear what I whisper when I sign." Ava laughed, then realized the woman wasn't joking. Margaret began moving her hands slowly, not the standard gestures for the deaf, but personal signs, adapted for her blindness. Ava paused, studying the rhythm. Then, with delicate precision, she responded, not exactly mimicking, but matching in feeling, in pulse, in grace. The restaurant fell silent. Even the waiters stopped mid-step. A billionaire's blind mother and a waitress communicating silently across a table. It was poetry written in air. When it ended, Margaret reached out, tears in her eyes. "You understood me." Ava nodded softly. "You speak beautifully, Mum." Elias sat frozen, phone forgotten, his chest tight in ways he didn't understand. He'd spent years trying to make his mother's world easier through money, yet in a single moment, this stranger had reached her more deeply than he ever could. Margaret turned to her son with a knowing smile. "She listens, Elias. You should learn from her." He didn't answer. He couldn't. When dinner was over, he rose to leave, his usual armor of control slipping slightly. "Thank you for your service," he said curtly, avoiding Ava's eyes. But Margaret lingered. "Ava, will you be here tomorrow evening?" "Yes, Ma'am," Ava said, surprised. "Good," Margaret replied with a smile. "I think I'd like to dine here again." Elias looked at his mother, puzzled. "You never eat the same place twice." "Maybe that's been my mistake," she said softly. As they left, Ava stood by the table, heart pounding, replaying the moment when her hands had met understanding in the air. She had no idea that what she'd just done, a simple act of compassion, had awakened something long dormant in a man who thought he could no longer feel. And Elias, walking beside his mother through the hotel lobby, couldn't stop seeing the way the golden light had caught on that waitress's hands, trembling slightly, humanly, beautifully. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering what warmth might feel like again. The next evening came cloaked in anticipation neither of them wanted to admit. Ava spent the day convincing herself that the previous night had been nothing, a fleeting encounter with two guests she would likely never see again. Still, she couldn't shake the image of the older woman's delicate smile, nor the quiet gravity in her son's eyes. When she arrived for her shift, the Aurelia buzzed with its usual perfection, the soft hum of wealth pretending to be casual. Polished marble floors gleamed, chandeliers burned with golden light, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine and money. Yet tonight, Ava felt a tension beneath the elegance, as if something unseen were about to unfold. At precisely 7, they arrived. Margaret Ward wore a cream shawl that framed her silver hair, her expression radiant as ever. Her son followed close, impeccable in a dark navy suit that matched his eyes, the kind of man who seemed to command the air around him without effort. He carried power, not through volume, but through silence. Ava's heart skipped once when she saw them, then steadied. She straightened her apron, reminding herself that kindness wasn't something she owed, it was something she chose. "Good evening," she greeted, her tone warm but professional. "Your usual table?" Margaret smiled. "Yes, please. I see they've kept it free for us." Elias nodded curtly, his gaze flicking toward Ava only once, brief, assessing, unreadable, but Margaret seemed determined to make conversation. "You know, Ava," she said as they sat, "I haven't stopped thinking about your hands. You speak with such clarity, you make silence feel comfortable." Ava blushed faintly. "That's kind of you, Ma'am. I've always thought silence is where people finally listen." Elias looked up then, a trace of curiosity in his expression. "Not everyone finds silence comforting." She met his eyes, steady, only those afraid of what they'll hear in it. His brows lifted slightly, not in offense, but in recognition. No one spoke to him that way. The dinner unfolded differently this time. Conversation drifted easily between mother and waitress, laughter bubbling up like music. Margaret asked about Ava's brother, and Ava shared small glimpses, his love for astronomy, how he used to map constellations by touch. In return, Margaret told her of the days before her blindness, when color had still been part of her world. Through it all, Elias listened quietly, his walls cracking one word at a time. At one point, Margaret turned toward her son. "Ava says her brother stargazes. You used to do that with your father, didn't you?" The air thickened. Ava noticed the faint tightening of Elias's jaw. "A long time ago," he said. Margaret sighed. "You two would have gotten along." Ava hesitated, sensing the wound in the space between them. "I'm sure your father was proud of what you've built," she said gently. Elias's eyes darkened. "Pride and love are not the same thing." Margaret reached for his hand across the table, but he withdrew subtly, his control returning. "Excuse me," he said, standing. "I need a moment." He walked toward the terrace, the city's reflection shimmering beyond the glass. Ava watched him go, her heart unexpectedly heavy. She wanted to say something, to anyone, but Margaret only sighed. He's been living with ghosts for too long. Ghosts? My husband betrayed him, Margaret said softly. Financially, emotionally. It ruined everything between them. When I lost my sight in the aftermath, Elias blamed himself. He stopped talking, stopped trusting. Money became his language of safety. Ava nodded slowly, the picture forming in her mind. A man whose wealth was armor, not luxury. Moments later, she stepped onto the terrace. The city's nightlights stretched endlessly below, like constellations reborn in glass and steel. Elias stood near the railing, hands in his pockets, the wind tugging at his jacket. "I'm sorry if I said something wrong," she began carefully. He turned slightly, his expression softer than before. "You didn't. People just forget that wealth doesn't cure memory." She joined him by the railing. "It must be strange at being surrounded by people who never tell you the truth." He glanced at her. "And you think you're an exception?" She smiled faintly. "I think truth has a way of finding its way through the cracks." He didn't answer, but his silence wasn't cold this time. It felt listening. After a long pause, he said quietly, "You're not like the others here. Because I don't care who you are. Because you see what most pretend not to." Their eyes met, the kind of gaze that lingers too long to be polite, too sincere to be ignored. For a heartbeat, the world around them, the lights, the wind, the noise, faded into stillness. Then Margaret's voice called softly from inside, "Elias, dear, come back before dessert melts." He smiled, barely, but enough to leave a mark. "Duty calls." As he turned to leave, he paused. "Ava, do you ever think about leaving this place? Doing something else?" She shrugged. "Dreaming doesn't pay rent, but it keeps people alive." She tilted her head, studying him. "Does it keep you alive?" He didn't answer. Only the faint shadow of a smirk crossed his face before he walked back inside. When the dinner ended, Margaret embraced Ava lightly. "You've brought light back into my son's world," she whispered. "He'll never admit it, but I see it." Ava laughed softly. "He doesn't seem the type to need help." Margaret smiled knowingly. "Even the strongest hands tremble when they finally start to feel again." Later that night, long after the restaurant had closed and the staff had gone home, Ava lingered near the terrace, watching the city through the same glass Elias had stood behind. The reflection staring back at her looked different, not because she'd met a billionaire, but because she'd seen the loneliness beneath one. Meanwhile, upstairs in the penthouse suite, Elias sat in silence beside his sleeping mother, replaying the evening. Her laughter, Ava's words, the way her hands had moved, graceful even in stillness. For the first time in years, his heart didn't feel like a locked vault. It felt uncertain. And for a man like Elias Ward, uncertainty was far more dangerous than loneliness. Days passed, but Ava couldn't shake the memory of that night. The terrace, the way Elias had looked at her when she spoke about truth, the quiet pull she didn't want to name. She told herself it was foolish. People like him didn't belong to people like her. And yet, the thought of him lingered like a soft echo she couldn't silence. At the Aurelia, life went on. The rich dined, the waiters floated between tables, and she kept her head down, serving with grace. But every evening she glanced at the door, never expecting him, yet always half hoping. Then one afternoon, when the restaurant was still empty, the manager approached. "Ava, Mr. Ward's office just called." Her heart stumbled. "Mr. Ward?" "Yes. He's hosting a private dinner upstairs tonight, family only. He requested you personally." She blinked, speechless. "Me? Are you sure?" The manager smiled faintly. "When a man like that asks, you don't question why." She spent the rest of the day in quiet turmoil. She pressed her uniform twice, tied her hair carefully, reapplied lipstick she rarely used. She wasn't trying to impress him, she told herself. She just didn't want to look out of place among people who measured value in appearances. That evening, she was escorted to the top floor of the hotel, a private dining suite that overlooked the entire city. The view stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a skyline bathed in gold, and a table for three stood in the center beneath a crystal chandelier. Margaret was already there, radiant in soft ivory. Beside her, Elias, sharp, composed, and devastating in a charcoal suit. "Ava," Margaret greeted warmly. "I'm so glad you came. Thank you for inviting me," Ava said, trying to hide her nervousness. Elias motioned toward the table. "We thought it was time to return the favor." "You didn't have to," she murmured. Margaret smiled. "When someone makes you feel human again, dear, you always have to." The dinner began softly, like music played from memory. There were no guests, no noise, just 3 people and the quiet hum of the city outside. The food was exquisite, though Ava barely tasted it. She kept wondering why she was there, what he wanted. Margaret spoke most of the evening. Stories of her youth, of Paris, of love letters she used to write before the world went digital. Ava listened with genuine joy, occasionally glancing toward Elias. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice had lost its edge. It was calmer now, warmer, a tone that made every word feel deliberate. At one point, Margaret reached for her son's hand. "You should tell her," she said. "Tell me what?" Ava asked softly. Elias exhaled. "My mother's surgery is next month. There's a new treatment that could partially restore her sight." Ava's eyes brightened. "That's incredible." Margaret smiled gently. "It is if it works, but I told Elias I'll only do it under one condition." Ava tilted her head. "Which is?" "That he learns to see before I do." A small laugh escaped Ava. "I'm not sure I understand." Margaret turned her face toward her son, smiling with affection. "He sees the world in numbers, balance sheets, and contracts. I want him to see it in people again. I told him that before I open my eyes to light, I want to know he's opened his heart to it first." Elias shifted, uncomfortable. "My mother likes poetic metaphors." Ava met his gaze. "Maybe she just knows you better than you think." He didn't reply, but something flickered in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement. Later, when dessert was served, Margaret stood with her cane. "I'll leave you two to talk. I'm suddenly quite tired." "Mother," Elias began, but she waved a graceful hand. "Don't be so formal. Ava will make sure you stay human." She left, and suddenly the silence between them felt too vast. The air thickened with unspoken tension. Ava cleared her throat. "You really didn't have to invite me." "I did," he said quietly, "because I didn't know how else to thank you." "For what?" "For reminding my mother that warmth still exists. For reminding me that people like you still do." She looked down, shy. "I didn't do anything special." "You did more than you realize." The words lingered, heavy and fragile. Elias stood and walked to the window. "I spent years building walls so no one could hurt me again. But the truth is, I built them so high, I couldn't even see out anymore. When I saw you signing to my mother, it was the first time I saw beauty that didn't ask for anything in return." Ava's heart raced. "You don't have to say that." He turned, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "Maybe I don't, but I want to." For a moment, the distance between them felt like gravity waiting to collapse. But before either could speak again, the elevator doors opened. A man in a grey suit stepped out, one of Elias's executives. "Mr. Ward, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation with the investors in Geneva. They're threatening to withdraw." Elias's jaw tightened. "Handle it. They won't speak to anyone but you." The air cracked. Duty, power, obligation, the old chains snapping back. Ava stood, sensing the shift. "You should go. It sounds important." He looked at her, torn between two worlds, one he owned and one that made him feel alive. Finally, he nodded. "I'll be back soon." But she knew better. People like him always belonged to elsewhere. When the elevator closed behind him, the silence that followed was different. Not peaceful this time, but hollow. Margaret re-entered moments later, smiling faintly as if she'd expected it. "He left." Ava nodded. "Work." Margaret sighed. "He's been running from one kind of blindness all his life." "What do you mean?" "Some people can't see others' hearts because they're afraid of their own." Ava said nothing, but the ache in her chest deepened. She thought she understood him, his guardedness, his loneliness, but now she realized understanding wasn't enough. As she left that night, the city stretched out before her, glittering, untouchable, cold. And somewhere among those lights, Elias sat in a boardroom thousands of miles away, pretending business was the only thing that kept him alive. But when the meeting ended, when the noise faded, when he was finally alone again, all he could see was a girl in a waitress uniform, signing words that spoke louder than any fortune he'd ever earned, and that terrified him more than anything else. 2 weeks passed without a word. For Ava, the silence was an answer, one that hurt more because she had expected it. Men like Elias Ward didn't fall into people's lives to stay. They arrived like seasons, sudden, beautiful, and destined to leave you colder when they were gone. She tried to move on, to bury the memory beneath work. The restaurant went on as usual, laughter, clinking glasses, polished silverware. But every night, when the lights dimmed and the world grew still, she found herself replaying that dinner. The way his voice softened when he said her name, the brief spark in his eyes before duty pulled him away. Sometimes she caught herself glancing toward the entrance of the Aurelia, half expecting him to walk in. He never did. Until one morning, when everything changed. Ava had just finished the breakfast shift when her manager called her into the office. His expression was strange, nervous, uncertain. "Ava, there's someone here to see you." "Who?" Before he could answer, the door opened. Elias stood there. He looked different, not in the way expensive suits change a man, but in the way exhaustion does. His tie hung loosely. His expression was guarded, but his eyes carried something raw. "Mr. Ward," she said, startled. He gave a faint nod. "Elias, please." The manager took the hint and excused himself. The moment the door closed, silence thickened. "I owe you an apology," Elias said finally. "You don't." "I do. I invited you into a world where I still hadn't learned how to stay." Her throat tightened. "You don't need to explain. I left that night because I was afraid," he said, voice low. "You make me feel things I thought I'd forgotten how to." She didn't speak. She couldn't. The weight of his confession pressed the air from her lungs. He took a step closer. "I spent the last 2 weeks trying to convince myself that I imagined it, that what I felt for you was gratitude, admiration, anything but what it really is." Ava's heartbeat thundered. "And what is it?" His eyes met hers. "It's the first real thing I've felt in years." The words lingered like something sacred and dangerous, but before either could move closer, the sound of hurried heels echoed down the hall. A young woman entered, sharp, confident, and clearly from Elias's world. "Mr. Ward, the board meeting is starting. They're waiting." He didn't turn. "Tell them I'll be there when I'm ready." The woman hesitated, eyeing Ava with thinly veiled judgment, then left. Ava took a small step back, grounding herself. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "Why?" "Because this isn't your world." He frowned. "You think I care about that?" "You should," she said. "Because one day you'll have to choose, and people like me don't survive being chosen second." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Finally, he nodded slowly, pain flickering through his expression. "You're right, and I've made too many wrong choices already." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "My mother's surgery is next week. She asked for you." Ava blinked. "For me? She says you bring her calm. Would you come?" Her voice softened. "If she wants me there, of course." He gave a faint smile. "Thank you." And then he was gone, again leaving behind the same quiet ache, but this time threaded with something else. Hope. The hospital room a week later smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Margaret Ward lay on the bed, fragile but serene, her hands folded loosely on her lap. When Ava entered, her face lit up. "You came," she said warmly. "I told you I would." Elias was there too, standing by the window. He looked different now, calmer, almost vulnerable. Margaret gestured toward Ava. "I'm not afraid today, you know, because you're here." Ava smiled softly, taking her hand. "You'll be seeing the world again soon, ma'am. That's something worth being brave for." The older woman chuckled. "Oh, my dear, I've already seen what matters." As the nurse prepared for surgery, Margaret turned toward her son. "Elias, promise me something." He hesitated. "Anything. If I open my eyes and I see light again, don't go back to the dark. Don't build those walls again." He swallowed hard. "I won't." "Good," she said with a faint smile. "Then I can rest easy." When they wheeled her away, the room felt suddenly too large. Elias sank into a chair, his composure cracking just slightly. Ava sat beside him in silence. He spoke after a long moment. "When I was younger, my mother used to tell me that light doesn't disappear. It just hides behind clouds until you remember how to look for it." Ava turned to him. "And have you found it again?" His gaze lingered on her face. "I think I'm looking right at it." Her breath caught. They sat that way for a long time, two people who had nothing in common but the way they made each other feel. Hours later, when the surgeon finally emerged, Elias stood so fast he nearly knocked over the chair. "The procedure went well," the doctor said. "It'll take time, but she's responding." Elias exhaled, emotion flooding through his usually steady voice. "Thank you." He turned to Ava, and for a moment his composure broke completely. "She's going to see again." Ava smiled, eyes glistening. "Then maybe she'll finally see what I've been seeing all along." He frowned slightly. "What's that?" She hesitated, then whispered, "That you're still human." Something in him unraveled at her words. The years of isolation, the weight of regret. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the quiet tremor in his breath. "Ava," he said softly, "you make me want to be better." The air between them pulsed with something unspoken, something that belonged to neither logic nor reason. But before either could reach for it, a nurse entered to update them. The moment broke like glass. Elias stepped back, regaining control. "You should go home," he said gently. "You've done enough." Ava hesitated. "And you?" "I'll stay. She'll need someone when she wakes." She nodded, understanding, even if part of her didn't want to. When she left the hospital that night, she looked back once through the glass doors. Elias stood beside his mother's bed, her hand in his head bowed. He looked like a man praying for more than a miracle. And she knew then something had changed forever, for both of them, but she didn't yet know how much the light could still burn. The morning Margaret Ward opened her eyes again. The world seemed to hold its breath. Sunlight spilled gently across the hospital room, soft and golden, as though even the dawn itself wanted to be kind. Elias stood beside her, his hand trembling slightly where it rested on the rail. Ava waited near the window, her heart tight with anticipation. The surgeon spoke softly. "Mrs. Ward, when you're ready, you may open your eyes." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Margaret's eyelids lifted. Light hit her pupils for the first time in years, and her lips parted in a silent gasp. She blinked several times, tears gathering instantly. "I can see," she whispered. Her voice broke. "It's blurry, but I can see." Elias stepped closer, his composure fracturing. "Mother?" She turned her head toward the sound, then saw him, truly saw him. Her hand rose to his face, trembling, tracing the lines she'd only known by touch. "My boy," she said through tears, "you've changed so much." He laughed softly, his own eyes wet. "So have you." Ava stood frozen, witnessing the reunion with a reverence she couldn't put into words. There was a holiness in that moment, not the religious kind, but the kind born of redemption. Then Margaret's gaze shifted past her son, settling on Ava. "You," she said, her voice trembling. "You're exactly how I imagined you." Ava smiled, tears in her eyes. "And you're even lovelier than I imagined." Elias turned, his gaze softening as he looked between them, the two women who had unknowingly rebuilt his world. After the initial flood of emotion, the doctor gave his instructions and left them in peace. Margaret sat up, holding her son's hand in one and Ava's in the other. "I owe both of you more than I can ever repay," she said. "You don't owe me anything," Ava replied gently. Margaret smiled. "That's exactly what makes you who you are." The days that followed were quiet but filled with small miracles. Margaret rediscovered color like a child seeing it for the first time. She would hold up a rose, mesmerized by its red, or stand by the window just to watch sunlight dance on glass. And through it all, Elias stayed close, softer, humbler, changed in ways the world would never understand. But Ava began to notice something else too, something he didn't say. The more his mother healed, the more distant Elias seemed. He was kind, attentive, but guarded again, as if the closer he came to peace, the more afraid he was of losing it. One evening, as the three of them sat together watching the sunset from the hospital terrace, Margaret turned to her son. "What happens now?" Elias smiled faintly. "You rest, you heal. And you?" "I'll make sure everything's ready for when you return home." Margaret nodded, but her eyes lingered on him with quiet worry. After she retired for the night, Elias and Ava remained on the terrace. The city glowed beneath them, bathed in copper and amber light. "She's stronger than I thought," Ava said softly. "She always was," he replied. "I just forgot how to see it." They stood in silence for a while, watching the skyline. Then Elias spoke again, his voice lower. "Do you ever think about leaving this place, Ava? Leaving the noise, the endless struggle?" She smiled faintly. "Every day. But life doesn't pause for dreams." "It should," he said. She looked at him, puzzled. "I've spent my entire life chasing things that didn't matter," he continued. "Now I have everything. Power, security, but I feel poorer than ever." "Maybe you're just learning the difference between wealth and worth," she said. He smiled slightly, turning to face her. "And if worth looks like you?" Her breath caught. "Elias," he stepped closer. "I told myself I'd never mix business and emotion again. But every time I see you, every time I hear your voice, I forget the world I came from." "Don't say that," she whispered. "You'll regret it." "I've regretted everything but you," he said. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself fall into the warmth she saw in his eyes, but fear held her back. "You don't understand what you're saying," she said quietly. "You live in a world that eats people like me alive. I don't want that world anymore." "Then leave it," she said. Don't pretend you can have both. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, his phone rang. The sound cut through the night like a blade. He hesitated, looked at the screen, then answered. Yes? His tone shifted instantly, formal, controlled. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and turned to her, regret already clouding his face. It's the board. There's a crisis at the London branch. I have to go. Ava's chest tightened. Of course you do. This isn't your fault? She interrupted, forcing a small smile. I know. He reached out, touching her arm gently. I'll come back. Maybe, she said softly. When he left, the terrace felt colder, emptier. Ava stayed there long after his footsteps faded, staring at the skyline that had become her silent witness. She didn't realize Margaret had returned until the older woman spoke behind her. He left again, didn't he? Ava turned, startled. You should be resting. Margaret smiled sadly. My heart has been resting for years. It's my son who hasn't. Ava sighed. He's trying. I know, Margaret said. But men like Elias, they've spent so long surviving storms that they forget how to live in sunlight. She stepped closer, touching Ava's hand gently. You're his sunlight, you know. Ava's eyes stung. Then why does he keep walking back into the dark? Margaret's gaze softened. Because even the bravest hearts fear peace. But one day he'll realize that love isn't a threat. It's the way home. That night, as Ava walked home under the quiet hum of city lights, she wondered if home was something Elias would ever allow himself to find. She wanted to believe he would. She wanted to believe that what flickered between them was strong enough to survive his world, but she also knew that love, when it came to men like him, was never simple. And deep down she feared that before he learned to come home to her, life would find a way to test how much she could lose. The following weeks unfolded like a slow unraveling. Elias's business crisis deepened, and so did his silence. He had left London to manage what he called temporary instability, but the truth, the one whispered through news networks and business columns, was harsher. His investors were turning on him, a hostile takeover loomed, and every day that passed, the empire he'd spent his life building was slipping further out of his control. For the first time, his name, Elias Ward, the untouchable visionary, was being spoken with doubt. Ava read about it all from afar. The headlines, the speculations, the interviews with faceless executives pretending sympathy. She kept telling herself it wasn't her place to worry. He belonged to another world, one that fed on collapse and reinvention. And yet, every time his name appeared on her phone screen, her chest tightened. Margaret, who was now recovering beautifully at home, noticed her distraction. You check the news more than I do, she teased gently one morning. Ava smiled faintly. Just staying informed. Margaret set her teacup down, her newly clear eyes soft with concern. You care for him. Ava looked away. He's your son. Of course I care. That's not what I meant. Ava didn't answer. Margaret sighed, the kind that carries years of knowing. When my vision was gone, I used to imagine colors, not shapes or faces, just colors. Warmth, light, movement. That's what he's become for you, isn't he? Something you can feel but not hold. Ava smiled sadly. Maybe, but I think I'm just a chapter in his story, not the ending. Margaret leaned closer. You underestimate your place in his heart. But Ava had learned not to believe in promises made across distance. Meanwhile, in London, Elias was fighting ghosts in glass towers. The boardroom that once bowed to his every decision now felt like an arena. Former allies whispered betrayals behind closed doors, reports, audits, accusations, everything weaponized against him. Layla Grayson, his former business partner, led the charge. Elegant, ruthless, and brilliant, she had once been his closest confidant. Some even said they had been engaged once, though neither ever confirmed it. Now her presence in the opposing chair was both haunting and inevitable. I told you sentiment would destroy you, she said, during one of their endless confrontations. You got soft, Elias. You started listening to your heart instead of the numbers. He met her gaze, calm but exhausted. Maybe that's not weakness, maybe it's what I should have done years ago. Layla smirked. Tell that to your shareholders. The meeting ended with quiet tension, and the knowledge that the next one might be his last. That night, alone in his penthouse, Elias poured himself a drink and stared at the city lights. He should have felt rage, fear, desperation, but all he felt was absence, the hollow where Ava's voice used to echo in his mind. He picked up his phone more than once, scrolling through her name, his thumb hovering over call. But pride, the oldest poison in his blood, always stopped him. Still, he couldn't let go of her. He read the reports from the hotel, the restaurant logs where she still clocked in, the invoices showing flowers delivered to Margaret's home each week, always signed Ava. He kept her alive in his world through details, because the alternative, losing her completely, terrified him more than failure itself. Then, one evening, everything collapsed. The takeover was finalized. His position was stripped. Layla's company acquired his largest assets. By morning, the man who once controlled empires was left with little more than what he could carry. He didn't announce it. He didn't fight. He simply walked away. 2 days later, without warning, he appeared again. Not in a suit, not in power, but standing on Margaret's porch with tired eyes and an unshaven face. Ava opened the door. The sight of him froze her. He looked like someone who had finally stopped pretending to be indestructible. His voice was low, fragile. "I didn't know where else to go." She stepped aside silently, letting him in. Margaret emerged from the sitting room, her expression filling instantly with both joy and worry. "Elias," she whispered. He knelt before her, taking her hands. "It's over, Mother. Everything." Her fingers tightened around his. "No, my dear. Everything false is over. That's different." He managed a broken smile. "You sound like her." Margaret glanced at Ava, who stood quietly near the window. "Then maybe you should listen." Elias turned toward Ava, his voice barely steady. "I ruined everything I built. They took it all. And all I can think about is how I deserve it." Ava's eyes softened. "You don't deserve to be destroyed for trying to feel again." He looked at her, something breaking open inside him. "I thought strength meant control, but strength is you, standing here, forgiving people like me." She shook her head gently. "I never stopped believing you could be good, Elias. I just stopped waiting for you to prove it." For a moment neither spoke. The air felt electric with everything they hadn't said. Then Margaret's voice broke the silence, warm and wise. "You can rebuild, my son. But this time, start with something that can't be taken." He looked between them, 2 women who had given him more humanity than the world ever had, and nodded. "I'll try," he whispered. That night, they ate together quietly in Margaret's kitchen, sharing bread and simple soup instead of champagne and caviar. For the first time, Elias didn't feel out of place in simplicity. Later, after Margaret went to bed, he and Ava lingered on the porch. The desert wind carried the scent of earth and rain. He turned to her, voice low. "I don't know how to start over." "You already have," she said. He smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't," she admitted. "But it's worth it." He studied her face, every freckle, every flicker of light in her eyes, as if memorizing something sacred. "Ava, if I told you I want to build my life around something real this time, around you, would that scare you?" She looked down, her heart pounding. "No, but it would scare me if you didn't mean it." He reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. "Then let me show you I do." The world felt impossibly still. The sound of their breathing mingled with the rustle of leaves. For the first time, she didn't pull away. He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "You were right about one thing." "What's that?" she asked. "That people like me can't have both worlds. So I choose yours." Before she could respond, he kissed her, softly, uncertainly, like a man remembering how. When they finally parted, tears shimmered in her eyes, but her smile was steady. "Then don't ever go back," she whispered. "I won't," he promised. And as the dawn began to rise behind them, Elias Ward, once a man defined by walls and wealth, realized that maybe this was what redemption truly looked like, the courage to stay when everything else was gone. For a few blissful weeks, life seemed almost ordinary. Elias stayed in the quiet rhythm of Margaret's home, fixing old furniture, cooking simple meals, helping around the garden. He had traded conference calls for morning walks and corporate reports for handwritten notes to his mother's doctor. He wasn't used to this kind of peace, but he clung to it with reverence. And Ava was there, not constantly, but enough. She came by after her shifts at the Aurelia, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with groceries she couldn't really afford, but refused to stop bringing. They'd sit together on the porch, while Margaret listened to her old records inside. He'd ask her about her brother, and she'd tell stories that made him laugh. Not the shallow laughter of charm, but the kind that starts deep, surprising even the one who laughs. Each evening ended the same way, not with grand declarations, but with quiet understanding, a touch that lingered, a gaze that spoke more than words ever could. And then the world found them again. It began as a whisper in the digital shadows, an article in an online magazine, followed by tabloids that feasted on rumor. Fallen billionaire reappears with waitress companion. New love or last disgrace. A photo accompanied it, taken from across the street, blurry but unmistakable. Elias and Ava sitting on the porch, her hand brushing his arm as they laughed. By morning, it was everywhere. Margaret read the headline first. She folded the paper quietly, hiding the sting in her chest before either of them woke. She knew the cruelty of the world that had once crowned her son, and she feared what it would do to the woman who had saved him. When Elias came down for breakfast, his phone was already buzzing with calls. Old associates, journalists, vultures disguised as friends. He silenced them all. But silence doesn't stop a storm. By midday, the paparazzi had found them. Cameras glinted through the hedges. Reporters shouted questions from the driveway. Ava stood frozen at the window, her face pale. "They found you," she whispered. "No," Elias said grimly. "They found us." He went outside, jaw set, eyes hard. The flashes hit him like lightning. Questions flying, voices overlapping. "Mr. Ward, is she your new mistress? Did she help you hide assets after the takeover? Is it true you were paying her before the collapse?" He said nothing. He simply opened the gate and walked forward until the noise faltered under the weight of his silence. Then, in a calm voice that cut through the chaos, he said, "Her name is Ava Lane. She's a waitress. She has nothing to do with my past, only my future. Now leave." But by then the damage was done. The world doesn't believe grace when it's quieter than scandal. When he returned inside, Ava was sitting at the table, her hands trembling. "It's everywhere," she murmured. "The restaurant called. They said the story's hurting their image. They asked me not to come in until things calmed down." Elias's throat tightened. "You lost your job because of me. I lost my privacy because of you," she said softly. "But the job, that was always temporary." Still, he saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, the humiliation of being reduced to gossip. He sat across from her. "I can fix this. I'll make a statement. Clear your name." "No," she said firmly. "That'll only make it worse." He clenched his jaw. "You shouldn't have to pay for my mistakes." She met his gaze, steady and sad. "That's what love is sometimes, Elias. Paying for what we didn't cause." Margaret entered then, her voice calm but resolute. "This house is no fortress. If you both stay, they'll never stop coming. You need to leave, together." Ava looked uncertain. "Leave where?" "Anywhere quiet," Margaret said. "Somewhere the world doesn't know your names." Elias hesitated. "Mother, I can't just—" She raised her hand firm. "You've already lost everything money can buy. Don't lose what it can't." He looked at Ava. "Would you come with me?" She hesitated, the question weighing heavily. Leaving meant abandoning her brother, her small world, the only stability she'd known. But staying meant letting him face the wolves alone. Finally, she nodded. For a while. That night, they packed what little they needed, a few clothes, some of Margaret's books, and an old camera Ava used for her brother's sign language videos. As they drove away, the flashes followed them down the road until the city lights faded behind. For hours, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't emptiness. It was protection, a fragile space where truth could breathe. By dawn, they reached the countryside, a small cottage Elias owned long before his empire. It was simple, secluded, surrounded by wild fields and distant hills. Ava stepped out first, breathing in the cold, clean air. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's forgotten," he said. "Maybe that's what makes it beautiful." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe we belong here." Days turned into weeks. The world's noise faded, replaced by the sound of wind through grass, birdsong, and quiet laughter. They cooked together, read together, walked in the fields until sunset. For the first time, Elias saw what life could be when stripped of ambition, raw, peaceful, human. One evening, as they watched the fire crackle in the hearth, Ava turned to him. "Do you ever miss it? The empire?" he asked. She nodded. He thought for a long moment. "Sometimes, but not the way you think. I miss believing I could control everything. But I don't miss the man I was when I did." She smiled gently. "Maybe that's the point of losing it." He reached for her hand. "Maybe losing it was the only way I could find you." They sat like that, fingers entwined, hearts steady, unaware that even peace has a price, because the world, though distant, hadn't truly forgotten him. Somewhere in the city, Layla Grayson watched an interview clip of him declaring Ava's innocence. Her eyes narrowed, her tone sharp. "So that's where you ran, Elias," she murmured. "You think you can hide forever?" She turned to her assistant. "Find them." Back in the quiet countryside, Ava felt a sudden chill. the kind that comes before a storm. She didn't know why, but something deep inside whispered that their peace was running out. The storm arrived without warning, not in thunder, but in footsteps. It was a crisp morning when Ava opened the cottage door and froze. A sleek black car stood on the dirt path, its tires biting into the wet earth. Out stepped a woman in a charcoal coat and red lipstick, elegance sharpened into weaponry. "Good morning," she said smoothly. "I'm looking for Elias Ward." Ava's instinct whispered danger. "He's not here right now. Who are you?" The woman smiled thinly. "Someone who remembers who he really is." Before Ava could reply, Elias appeared behind her, his expression tightening the moment his eyes met the woman's. "Layla," her smile widened. "So, you do remember me?" The air between them thickened instantly. History, regret, and something darker pulsing beneath politeness. Ava stepped aside as Elias gestured for Layla to come in. The woman's heels clicked on the wooden floor, out of place in the modest cottage. She glanced around with quiet disdain. "So this is where the great Elias Ward decided to disappear." Elias crossed his arms. "Why are you here?" "To give you a chance to stop pretending," she replied. "You can't live like this. You're not built for exile. I'm not built for your world anymore." Layla tilted her head. "You think running away makes you virtuous? You think playing house with your waitress redeems you?" Ava's pulse spiked. She opened her mouth to speak, but Elias's voice cut through, low and cold. "Watch your tone." Layla turned to him, smirking. "Defensive already? How touching." Elias's jaw clenched. "Say what you came to say and leave." "Fine," she said, pulling a folder from her bag. "I came to tell you that you still have a stake in the company. They're about to sell off what's left, including your mother's foundation. If you sign these papers, you can reclaim control, save something from the wreckage." He didn't take the folder. "You want me back so I can make you look legitimate again." Layla's voice softened slightly. "I want you back because you belong there, because you and I built something no one else could understand." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that trembles on the edge of old temptation. Ava stood still, her hands curling into fists. She didn't need to hear more. "I think you should go," she said quietly. Layla glanced at her with a half smile. "You really believe he'll stay here forever, don't you? Cooking soup, fixing fences, pretending he's one of you." She looked back at Elias. "Sooner or later, he'll remember what it feels like to have power. And when he does, this little dream will end." Elias's voice came sharp. "Get out." Layla's smile didn't waver. "You can't outrun yourself, Elias." She turned to leave but paused at the door, her eyes flicking toward Ava. "And you should know something. Men like him don't love. They repent until they get bored." Then she was gone. The silence left behind was suffocating. Elias didn't speak for a long time. He stood near the window staring into the rain. Ava watched him, her heart aching. "Is she right?" she asked softly. He turned. "About what?" "About you. About leaving all this behind someday." He shook his head. "No." "But you hesitated," she said, "when she talked about the company, about what you lost." His voice cracked slightly. "Because she reminded me of who I was, the man who let ambition ruin everything. I hate that man, Ava, but part of him still lives in me." She stepped closer. "Then kill him." He met her eyes. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said quietly, "but it's the only way you'll ever really be free." He looked down, his voice breaking. "Do you know what it's like to have everything you touch turn to ash?" "Yes," she said, "because I'm watching you do it again." Her words hit like truth always does, gently but deep. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "Elias, I love you, but I can't stand next to someone who keeps looking over his shoulder." His face tightened. "I'm not leaving." "Then prove it." He looked away, unable to answer. That night, the cottage was silent. The storm outside beat against the windows, while they lay on opposite sides of the same room. The first time distance had felt colder than loneliness. When dawn came, Ava found him sitting by the dying fire, staring at the papers Layla had left behind. "Are you going to sign them?" she asked, her voice calm but trembling. He looked up, guilt shadowing his features. "I burned them." She searched his eyes, unsure whether to believe him. "And if she comes back, then I'll remind her and myself that the only thing worth building anymore is here." She knelt beside him, searching for sincerity in his gaze. "Then don't ever let that woman define you again." "I won't," he said. But even as he said it, his eyes drifted to the window, to the world beyond, the one he used to rule. And though she didn't say it out loud, Ava knew that sometimes the past doesn't knock to be let in, it breaks the door. Later that week, as the rain cleared, she found Elias in the yard repairing the old fence. His hands were steady, his focus absolute, but his silence was different now, not peaceful, heavy. She walked up behind him. "You're somewhere else again," she said softly. He didn't look up, just thinking. About her, about everything. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then stop thinking. Just be here." He looked up, eyes clouded with conflict. "I'm trying. I know," she said. "But trying isn't the same as staying." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She smiled faintly, though her heart was breaking. "You'll have to choose one day, Elias. Not between me and her, but between who you were and who you're becoming." As she turned to go inside, his voice stopped her. "And if I fail?" She paused in the doorway. "Then I'll forgive you, but I won't wait forever." The wind carried her words away, but they stayed with him, echoing through the quiet fields long after she was gone. Because somewhere deep down, Elias Ward knew that Layla hadn't just brought temptation back. She had brought the truth he'd been trying to bury, the reminder that no matter how far you run, the past always remembers your address. The next few days blurred together in uneasy calm. Elias worked in silence, chopping wood, fixing leaks, tending the garden, anything to occupy his hands so his mind wouldn't wander. Ava moved around him like sunlight through storm clouds, gentle, but never still. She loved him, but something in her had changed. She no longer waited for promises. She watched his actions instead. Margaret called them every evening. Her voice was warm, but worry lived beneath every question. "He's quieter, isn't he?" she asked one night. Ava hesitated. "He's thinking." Margaret sighed softly. "He's always thinking. It's feeling that frightens him." And she was right. Because while Elias had burned Layla's papers, the temptation they carried didn't burn with them. It lingered. One morning, a thick envelope arrived. No sender, no markings, only his name written in elegant pen. He opened it while Ava was outside hanging laundry. Inside was a single document, an offer from the company's new board. They were giving him one last chance, return as a consultant, salvage what was left, rebuild his legacy. He read it twice, heart pounding, mind spinning. It wasn't just a job, it was redemption, or at least the illusion of it, the chance to prove he wasn't a failure. He folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his jacket. He told himself it didn't mean anything. He wouldn't respond. But the seed was planted, and seeds have a way of growing in silence. That evening, Ava noticed it. The distance, the distraction, the way he looked past her when she spoke. "You're somewhere else again," she said, drying her hands. He forced a smile. "Just tired." She studied him, unconvinced. "I can always tell when you're lying." He looked down. "I'm not lying." "Then prove it." He crossed the room and kissed her, desperate, sudden, almost as if to erase the question. But even as his lips met hers, she felt it, the hesitation in his touch, the shadow in his breath. When he pulled away, she whispered, "That's not love, Elias, that's guilt." His expression hardened. "Why does everything I do feel like a test to you?" "Because you keep running," she said, her voice trembling. "You say you've changed, but the moment the world calls your name, you listen." He turned away, anger flickering beneath exhaustion. "You don't understand what it's like to build something from nothing and watch it fall apart." "No," she said quietly. "I understand what it's like to build something real and watch you tear it apart." He froze. The truth hit harder than anger ever could. They didn't speak for 2 days. The silence between them wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the kind that screams. On the third morning, Ava woke to find him gone. His coat, his suitcase, gone too. The only thing left on the table was a folded note. "I need to finish this. Don't wait for me." Her knees weakened. She sat at the table, staring at the paper, until the ink blurred through her tears. She called Margaret, voice breaking. He left. There was silence on the other end, then a quiet sigh. "Of course he did. Do you know where he went? To the only place he's ever belonged, the battlefield of his own pride." In London, the city lights greeted Elias like an old enemy. The moment he stepped into the glass building that once bore his name, everything he'd buried came rushing back. The cold air, the polished marble, the whispers of people who once feared him. Layla was waiting in the boardroom. She looked triumphant. "I knew you'd come back." He ignored the satisfaction in her tone. "I'm here to make sure the foundation survives. Nothing more." "Of course," she said smoothly, "but you know how these things work. Once you taste control again, it's never nothing more." He didn't answer. He signed the agreement, the pen scratching across the paper like betrayal made visible. Ava didn't find out through him. She found out through the news. A headline, small but unmistakable. Elias Ward returns to rescue former empire. She dropped her phone, her breath shattering. The world spun. She had given him everything, peace, love, belief, and he had chosen the ghost of his old life again. Margaret came as soon as she could. She found Ava sitting outside, her eyes hollow. "I thought he'd changed," Ava whispered. "I thought this time was different." Margaret sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "He did change, but sometimes change isn't enough to save a man from himself." Ava's voice broke. "Then what saves him?" "Losing what he can't replace," Margaret said softly. In London, Elias worked like a man possessed. Meetings, rebranding, late nights under the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. Layla watched him with satisfaction, not because she loved him, but because she knew him. "You can't help yourself," she said one night. "You crave control the way most people crave air." He looked up, eyes hollow. "Maybe that's all I deserve." Layla tilted her head. "And what about your little waitress? Still pretending she's waiting for you?" He didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. "You'll see," she said. "You'll thank me someday for reminding you who you are." But she was wrong, because late that night, after everyone had left, Elias sat alone in the boardroom staring at his reflection in the glass. The city lights blurred behind him, the same skyline that once made him feel invincible. Now it just made him feel sick. He thought of Ava, her laughter, her quiet strength, the way she'd said, "Prove it." He realized he'd failed the one test that mattered. He took off his watch, his cufflinks, the expensive armor that had once defined him. One by one, he left them on the table. Then he wrote a single sentence on the back of the contract and folded it carefully. "You were right. The world isn't home. You are." He left the office without looking back. When Ava woke the next morning, she found a car pulling up the long road to the cottage. Her heart raced, though she tried to fight it. Elias stepped out, disheveled, rain-soaked, his eyes red but alive. He walked straight to her. "I signed the papers," he said. She swallowed hard. "I know. I signed them to save the foundation, not the company. And then I left, for good this time." She searched his face. "And what happens when the next temptation comes?" He took her hands, trembling. "Then I'll remember this, standing here, begging for another chance." Ava hesitated, her heart caught between forgiveness and fear. "You've said that before," he nodded. "And this time I'll live it." His voice broke as he whispered, "Ava, I don't know how to be the man you deserve, but I can be the man who keeps trying to be." She closed her eyes, tears falling freely now. "Then stay." He exhaled, not in relief, but in surrender. "I will." And for the first time, he meant it. But even as they embraced, Margaret's words lingered in Ava's mind. Sometimes love saves a man only after it breaks him first. And Ava knew they weren't done breaking yet. The days that followed were quiet, not because everything was healed, but because both of them finally stopped running. Elias didn't speak of London again. He rose early, made coffee, and joined Ava in the small rituals of ordinary life. Fixing the fence, feeding the stray cat that had decided to live under the porch, reading to Margaret over the phone each night. The silence between him and Ava was no longer tense. It was careful, sacred, a fragile kind of peace built not on promises, but on presence. One evening, as the sky burned gold behind the hills, Ava stood by the window watching him. He was outside, sleeves rolled up, his hands roughened by weeks of real work. The man who once commanded boardrooms now knelt in the dirt, repairing a loose garden post with quiet patience. Margaret's words echoed in her mind. "He'll only learn peace when he earns it." Ava smiled faintly. Maybe he finally was. When he came back in, dusk had already fallen. He set down his tools and caught her watching him. "What?" he asked softly. "You look..." She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Human," he chuckled. "I was hoping for handsome." "That too," she said, laughing. But beneath the laughter was something heavier, love that no longer needed proof. They sat by the fire that night, the flames painting their faces in gold. Elias stared into the light for a long while before speaking. "I got a letter today," he said. Her heart quickened. "From London?" He nodded. "The board wanted to thank me. They said the foundation I saved is thriving. They even asked if I'd return as a mentor." "And what did you say?" He looked at her, the glow of the fire reflecting in his eyes. "I said no." She smiled gently. "That must have been hard." He shrugged. "Not as hard as losing you again would have been." Her breath caught. Elias. He reached for her hand, his voice barely a whisper. You were right about everything. I kept thinking love was something you win, something you earn after you fix yourself. But love isn't a reward, is it? It's the thing that keeps you alive long enough to become someone worth loving. Ava's eyes shimmered. You've already become that. No, he said softly. I'm still becoming. For a long time they said nothing. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the faint rhythm of their breathing. A few months later, Margaret came to stay with them. Her sight, though still fragile, had returned enough for her to see the life her son had built from ruin. She often sat outside with Ava, sipping tea and watching Elias work. He's lighter now, she said one afternoon. Ava smiled. He's learning to forgive himself. Margaret nodded. And you? Have you forgiven him? Ava paused. I didn't have to. I just had to understand him. Margaret reached out and took her hand. You've done for him what all the money in the world never could. You taught him how to see. At that moment, Elias appeared in the doorway, sunlight behind him, smiling in that quiet, uncertain way that made her heart ache. Mother, come see, he said. The garden's finally blooming. Margaret stood, linking her arm through Ava's. Then let's go admire your handiwork, my dear, she said to Ava, and in her tone was a truth deeper than any compliment. When they stepped outside, the garden was a burst of color. Lilies, wildflowers, even a row of roses blooming stubbornly against the odds. The air smelled of rain and earth, the sky wide and forgiving. Margaret smiled, her eyes glistening. You planted beauty in the same soil that once grew pride. Elias looked down, humbled. It was Ava's idea. Ava shook her head. You did the work. He turned to her then, really looking at her. Not the way he used to, as something he needed, but as something he finally understood. I don't know what comes next, he said, but I know I'll never stop choosing this. Choosing you. She smiled through tears. Then you've already won. Years passed quietly. The world moved on without them, and they let it. The scandal faded, replaced by new names, new stories. The company became a headline from another time. But the Dawson Foundation, the part Elias had saved, flourished, funding schools and programs for those who needed light the most. And in every annual report, one anonymous donor's note appeared in the closing pages, dedicated to the one who taught me how to see. Elias never confirmed it was his. He didn't need to. Ava already knew. They grew older together in that cottage. Two souls who had survived storms and still found ways to laugh. He wrote again, not contracts or speeches, but small journals, stories about his mother, about loss, about love that outlives wealth. Sometimes he read them aloud to Ava under the stars, his voice steady, her head on his shoulder. One night, as the fire burned low, Ava whispered, "Do you ever wish you could go back?" He shook his head. "No, because everything I lost led me here." She smiled softly. "To me, to light," he said, "and you were the light." She reached for his hand, squeezing gently. "Then promise me something, anything. When I'm gone someday, don't stop looking for the light." He turned to her, eyes full of quiet ache. "I don't have to. It's already in me." Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying their laughter into the night. The man who had once been ruled by wealth and fear now sat content beside the woman who had taught him how to see, not with his eyes, but with his heart. And in that small house at the edge of nowhere, they proved what the world always forgets, that love beyond money is the only kind that survives time itself. Subscribe to be part of stories that still believe love can heal what life once broke.